Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're taking a look at about the past 3 months of footage, all shot in the Bone Valley, to kind of help you guys understand how that region of trackage operates now in summer of 2025. Now, as many of you guys also know, the biodiesels have been reigning the Tampa Bay area for about 3 years now, but CSX has sent down some Dash 8s, and you're going to see them in the mix too. On this hot April morning, though, we got biodiesels leading L778, seen from the 301 overpass in Tampa. It's April 12th, 2025, and my friend Dakota and I are set up on the side of US 301, looking west over the A-line and towards Yeoman and Uceda yards, the now combined yards that once hosted Atlantic Coastline and Seaboard terminals, currently known as CSX's Tampa Terminal, where trains like this L778 originate. 778 isn't a Bone Valley train per se, but we'd catch him heading north towards Winston this day with empty rock gondolas that were unloaded on the Seminole Gulf Railway earlier this week around Sarasota. Usually 778 uses a pair of 6-axle units, although sometimes he can have large consists of foreign power when potash or ethanol trains come into Tampa, and power assigned to yard jobs for a couple days while the product is unloaded at the ports. That wouldn't be the case this evening though, as L778 crawls out of the south end of the yard in Tampa on a track called New Connection. The main customer on 778's work orders is always Conrad Yelvington in Temple Terrace, north and west of Tampa by a few miles. This day 778 would start his evening by making a run up there by coming out of Yeoman Yard and onto the A-line westbound in order to reach Navy Y and the old ACL branch that now takes trains to Conrad and to Hillsborough Industrial Park at 56th Street. Just a couple Saturdays ago, we'd be out for a day in the Bone Valley, starting with a stop in Tampa and a check of the yard, where U778 would be building his train. L778 is a daily local train, but this Saturday morning he'd be running around 12 hours behind schedule, hence the U prefix instead of the L on U778. The U series of symbols just means a recrew of a local, which checks out this morning as we'd set up at the distant Tamango ABS signal, a shop many know around Tampa, but one that has some pretty lackluster lighting in the afternoon, but great morning light for the occasional morning freight that Tampa sends out on the A-line.
Yes, dispatcher.
U778.
778.
Riddler here, 84 cars for Winston. 2 motors, plenty of gas. Good to go here.
All right, come on with it. I'm on light shift. Here we go, bro.
Another train that uses Tampa's local power pool is L700, the Tropicana Juice train, seen this morning crossing Bullfrog Creek on the south side of Gibsonton with a short train for Bradenton and the Seminole Gulf interchange in Onico. Note the gondolas on the front of the train, now loaded compared to the empties on that 778 at 301. This is how that rock service to the Seminole Gulf cycles. Loads are brought from Miami to Winston, taken to Tampa on L778, then to Bradenton and the interchange by L700, back to Tampa on 700's return trip, and then back to Winston on L778. Just an hour later, we're still on the AZA line, now at milepost AZA 885.2, and the spur into Mosaic's East Tampa facility. This is the only crossing on the spur, another big one, of US 41 once again. Thankfully for drivers this morning, the train that would be setting off the crossing bells and gates would be a short one, comprised of 2 biodiesels heading into East Tampa to grab their train before heading into the Bone Valley. That's B339 out of Tampa, and the first Bone Valley train that we'll be looking at. It's fairly common down here, running almost every day with whatever power Tampa has lying around. This is East Tampa, a massive phosphate facility owned by the giant Mosaic, located on the banks of Tampa Bay and the Alafaya River. The yard here is called East Tampa and is made up of 9 staging tracks where CSX drops off loads, handing off the operation to Mosaic, who has 2 switcher locomotives buried deep in the plant right now. Then, once the loads are unloaded, the empties are put right back where they're found, like in our case today, with those 3 tracks filled up with empty wet rock hoppers. The view from East Tampa is pretty cool with the drone, as looking to the south along the coast are the smokestacks and silos of Big Bend and Ardent Mills at Port Red Wing, and looking north is Tampa's skyline, all covered by a thin sheet of clouds this cool Saturday morning. Right at the switch to the AZA line is a curious little single head signal. I'm not sure if it's even in operation or of its purpose, but if any of y'all know, let me know in the comments below, because I'm very curious about it. About 30 minutes at East Tampa, and our train here, B339, has assembled his empty train and is currently getting signals to depart the yard, and continue north towards Tampa and the S-Line. 339 is a phosphate shuttle job between East Tampa and Agrock, and today he'd be running that route, departing East Tampa just after 0900 today. We'd depart with B339, moving north by east down around Tampa on I-75, and setting up once again at Valrico. As many of you know, this is where the Valrico sub begins, connecting to the S-Line here and the route for trains like this B339 to enter the Bone Valley. It's the beginning of dark territory too, so an EC1 must be given to continue south on the line from here. This is the normal procedure and is why 339 got his EC1 as he exited the port, now running good through the junction. After Valrico, it'd be a lot of State Road 60, which would take us into Mulberry, where we turn south towards Bradley. Here at the State Road 37 crossing, the Brewster sub comes in from the west, making a 90-degree turn at the junction, pointing the track south towards Agrock, Fort Greene, Ona, and finally Arcadia. Right before the junction on the west side is a short siding called Tampa Long, which hosts my favorite trackside sign in all the Bone Valley. I'm not sure if all sidings used to have these, or even names for that matter, but the old South End Tampa Long sign would be the center of the frame for this one. Back in the early 1990s, CSX installed these signs at every siding, junction, and yard to help crews familiarize themselves with the complex network of trackage that is the Bone Valley. In the words of CSX's Jacksonville division manager at the time, Mr. Mike Sewell, we used to put trains in every siding, storage track, and yard along the right-of-ways, considering we'd run close to 40 trains a day down there. At one point, the Bone Valley had plenty of customers all in the phosphate industry, between IMC Agrigo, Agrifos, Cargill, Mulberry Phosphates, Farmland, CF Industries, and a couple others. It's crazy to think what a busy area this once was, as now Mosaic owns pretty much everything and is down to just 2 mines, one at Fort Meade and one at Agrock, where 339 is destined for. A chase down the Brewster sub would be imminent as 339 made his way south, seen just north of Agrock now. Just a couple minutes later, now pulling into the yard, where Mosaic will then take this train to the mine at Four Corners, about a 9-mile trip on Mosaic's railroad. From overhead, the Bone Valley is a barren place, with its landscape scarred with decades of mining its precious minerals out from the ground, slowly reconquered by nature once the mines were torn down, tracks pulled up, and phosphate supply drained. The many mines around here have now been reduced to just 2, as the land around here has already been mined, which yields the end of mines and their trains when all the phosphate has been dug up. This is why this area is so deserted. At one time, small towns around the mines would rise up as employees would build their homes and start families around their jobs, slowly becoming ghost towns once mines moved or facilities were abandoned. It's a surreal sight to look around and see miles of flatlands that, not too long ago, were highlighted by drag lines and rail yards, now overcome by the wildlife in the area and slowly healing from what these massive companies banked off of. With Mosaic planning to move further west in Manatee County with its Four Corners mine, and east into Highlands County with its Fort Meade facilities, the question remains, how much longer will these century-old lines be needed, as someday soon, Florida will have no more phosphate to mine? For now, though, it's still a unique operation down here, as Mosaic's rail crew has picked up the empty train once 339 has left with his loaded shipment for East Tampa, now seen from the State Road 37 crossing, with two Jeep 38s pulling hard towards Four Corners, where this train will be loaded and returned in just a few hours. We catch up to that 339 now on his return journey to Tampa. Remember, most trains down here are turn jobs, meaning they'll return to where they started. In this case, East Tampa for these loaded cars and Tampa for the engines and crew. On the Valrico sub around milepost SZ6 is Durant, a small siding now used as another storage track and the one-time junction between this Tampa-bound line to the west and the Seaboard's main line from Bradenton via Palmetto, Parrish, Willow, and Wimauma. A portion of that line still exists today as the Florida Railroad Museum down closer to Palmetto, with the present-day Durant being a high school, a general store, and a cluster of homes that line the tracks for about a mile or so. Usually 339 can roll right through here at track speed, which is 40 miles per hour, but today he'd be slowing to a stop at the north end of the siding to pick up a now mended car, pulling it out of its short-term storage in Durant Pass. A mile north of our post in town is the north end of its siding at milepost 5.1, where a GR1 and a wet rock gondola are staged and waiting. The white car with the flip top is called the GR1 and used at Rockport along Tampa Bay by flipping the entire car over and upside down, utilizing a special machine called a dumper. We'll get more in depth about that operation here in a couple minutes, but for now, 339 would be picking up that GR1 and the open wet rock gondola and adding the latter to his train. In doing so, the crew of 339 would use a method called kicking cars, which is the railroad term for when a car is uncoupled while moving, using its own speed and inertia to roll towards its train, coupling by itself, and saving the crew a couple of minutes. An experienced crew will use this operation system often and complete it safely and quickly, like today's 339, who's now backing that GR1 back into the siding.
Last one. Good. Quick step.
Soon the train would be ready to take off, so I'd walk down the tracks a little bit to the Seaboard milepost 5 on this 11-mile stretch of the Valrico sub. Mileposts on the line switch back to the normal SV prefix at Welcome, where the Plant City sub joins the main and runs all together through Mulberry and at one point all the way to Barto and Fort Meade. Continuing on the Tampa side of the Bone Valley, the next most common move is B311, a similar train to 339, as it's also a turn job out of Tampa, running into the BV and back all in one shift. It's just after 8 a.m. now on a hot June Saturday morning, and 311 is departing Tampa at TS with a pair of Dash 8s, with orders to pick up an empty train of those GR1s at Rockport.
Dispatch.
B311, GM.
311.
So we're ready to leave TS with our 2 engines and head into Rockport. You can take us.
Located just 2.5 miles south of Yeoman on the AZA line, Rockport is a train-to-ship transloading yard built in the 1960s by the Seaboard Coastline to alleviate the constant rail traffic through downtown Tampa. Nowadays, Rockport gets a handful of yard jobs and locals a day that work the numerous customers at Port Sutton and Pendola Point, and phosphate trains like this B311, who will be bringing the port a fresh load of phosphate from Ridgewood. B311 and B315 are the most common Rockport trains, with the B315 being another shuttle train that utilizes those GR1 hoppers to take empties from Rockport to New Wales, bringing back loads to the port like 311. On a hot spring afternoon, B315 would be crawling out of Rockport and onto the main line, starting their day with a run up the Yeoman sub to the Valrico sub and then the Brewster sub to New Wales with a string of 68 empties in trail. Back to that B311 from before. It's been about an hour in Rockport, and 311 has now picked up their empty train and is ready to head north on the Yeoman sub and into the Bone Valley. A quick call of the dispatcher to leave Rockport, and 311 gets signals to depart. Now seen just a few minutes after departing from the Orient Road overpass that carries the busy roadway above Yeoman Yard and the Tampa bypass, which 311 is currently on, bypassing the yard, all overlooked by Tampa's skyline behind.
I see you, Christian. I see you.
Chasing in the Bone Valley isn't too hard, just getting to it can be the pain, especially when starting the drive in Tampa. Between there and Valrico, the only route that follows the tracks is State Road 60, which runs right through Brandon and the dense traffic light garden that, as sure as the sun rises, is congested and a slow drive. Thankfully for us, 311 would have to slow to a stop just south of Valrico Junction, as there'd be a crossing with a malfunctioning gate which mandates a stop and manual protection from the conductor. This would give us an extra few minutes that we'd need to set up at Mulrennan Road as 311 approached. Back on 60 from Valrico, the highway traffic fizzles out to the east as you approach the south side of Plant City at Hopewell and into the wooded suburbs of Mulberry at Willow Oak. A short drive off the main road is Nichols at milepost SV 839. At one point, Nichols hosted a phosphate mine to the south of the Valrico sub and a large processing plant to the north, one similar to New Wales and Ridgewood. All owned decades ago by the late AgriPhos and IMC companies, a short phosphate railroad used to run through here, transporting freshly mined wet rock to the plant, a trip that was only a few miles at its longest, crossing the CSX in the process, before shutting down like the rest when the land had nothing more to give. Like Brewster, when the mining left, so did the community, leaving Nichols with an abandoned plant and a lonely post office, which trains like B311 roll by at track speed. Through Mulberry we go, back on 60, as 311 approaches Ridgewood, passing South Mulberry Y, where the Aiken sub from Bradley connects, and the location of Safe Train signals, installed just a couple of years ago, replacing Seaboard's relics that were still on the job well into the 21st century. A couple more miles and you'll reach Ridgewood, another massive mosaic terminal where fresh wet rock phosphate is processed and loaded into jumbo-covered hopper cars to be taken north to customers out of state. It also handles traffic like 311, who'll be dropping off his entire train of empties in the 20-track yard here before grabbing a loaded train of GR1s for Rockport. The plant breaks out of the main line using a Y, which is used by trains from both directions like B311 from the west and Fort Meade shuttles to the east. We'll get to that area soon, but for now 311 has gotten his authority into the plant after a Mosaic employee unlocks the derail from the spur and notifies his personnel of the inbound train. Now is also a good time to mention that a good friend Eddie would be the engineer on today's run, making for a fun chase and one that he's worked for, now in the engineer's seat after 20 years on the railroad.
What train go ahead?
Hey, we'll come up track 20 and drop them off. Swing the wide and come back through the plant.
All right, here we go. Appreciate it.
In Ridgewood, normal.
Mission Dakota. Multicolor films. I see you.
One interesting find on these old GR1s are the little animals that are stenciled on the side of almost every hopper car, ranging between safari and tropical animals. I have no clue what they're meant to represent, but they all look to be company added. If anyone has any knowledge or thoughts, drop them in a comment below. I'm curious to know. Ridgewood's phosphate supply mostly comes from the mine at Fort Meade, an operation that, like its sister facility in Agrock, is a mine that's located a couple miles from CSX's transfer yard, with Mosaic and its small railroad doing the connection trips. Like I said earlier, sometimes phosphate here is taken to the port at Tampa Bay or loaded for unit trains to Chicago and beyond, which are brought to Mulberry via local. This is L767, a daily local out of Winston that runs around the Bone Valley in the mid-mornings and into the afternoon, switching customers around Ridgewood and working the plant in the process. We're at the IMCY that leads trains into Mulberry Yard off the Valrico sub and towards the Bone Valley sub to Winston, as L767 arrives from Ridgewood with one of those unit trains from up north in tow. Consisting of jumbo-covered hoppers, this product has been processed into diammonium phosphate through a series of filters and added chemicals, making a compound that evidently is extremely useful for farms worldwide, using Florida's naturally rich soil to fertilize the nation. Since these unit phosphate trains still originate out of Mulberry, L767 will drop his entire train in the massive Prairie Yard just north of Mulberry's facilities, which will be picked up in the coming days by a Winston road crew. We'll take the train north towards Waycross as a B207, B209, B211, or a symbol of the like. Mulberry is the center of Bone Valley operations these days, although most trains run by on the main line around the yard to the east or the south. Another Mulberry-based train is B341, which is designated as a New Wales to Agrock shuttle train carrying freshly mined phosphate from Agrock and Four Corners Mine to New Wales in America's largest phosphate processing plant. On this day, we'd be set up at Welcome, where the Plant City sub connects to the Valrico sub, and where another B339 would be waiting patiently for track authority to Agrock. Working down the line from Edison would be B341, who'd already made his runs between Agrock and New Wales, and is now ready to return to Mulberry for the morning. Departing from New Wales, that would require the Brewster sub up to Edison and the Valrico sub from Edison to IMC, all via EC1, which meant 339 would be stopped until 341 was by. We'd set up next to one of the many lush farms in the area, just east of Edison, where 341 would line the radio switches for the eastbound track to Mulberry.
CSX. South Y Edison. Milepost. 836.2. Switch is reverse. Switch is reverse. CSX. South Y Edison. Out.
Since New Wales would be receiving a loaded train this morning, 341 would be light power, returning to Mulberry around 11 a.m. after starting their day well before dawn. With 341 now out of the way and his track authority given back to the dispatcher, 339 would get the go-ahead to Agrock as we'd swing around the corner to the north leg of Edison Y as 339 curves onto the Brewster sub. From our vantage at Allen Street, we can see the south leg that 341 just took towards Mulberry and the stem of the Y with its now reversed radio switch, hence the red track light neighboring the switch. 339 would be a nice catch this Tuesday morning, as two more Dash 8s would lead the train south to the mine.
switch at the stem of Edison is in the normal position.
As you can probably tell by now, B339 is the most common Bone Valley train, running about 5 times a week nowadays, seen just days prior now working the evening shift, with 2 biodiesels leading the charge. We're facing north just south of Bradley Junction, still on the Brewster sub, as it straightens out for the last 8 miles to Ag Rock, where phosphate trains still run on.
Milepost 843.4.
Once upon a time, wet rock moves would continue south past Ag Rock to mines in Hardy County closer to Arcadia, owned and operated by CF Industries and farmland at South Hardy and Hickory Creek respectively. Now on Old State Road 37 from Bradley, we chase 339 into the sunset as it passes Brewster, a town once again built around a couple mines and small yard, shut down in the early 1960s when the deed of Brewster was sold back to the state of Florida as a part of a paying agreement between the state and surrounding phosphate companies for environmental damages. A spur used to break out here, running into CSX's small 4-track Brewster yard before continuing to IMC's Big 4 mine and Fort Lonesome mine at the end of the line, aptly named the Lonesome Spur. It's certainly lonesome now, as only rotting ties and rusted spikes remain in the Floridian brush, with memories of the old community and village being about the only thing that remains. In the 2020 census, Brewster registered a population of 0, ultimately putting it off the map. Since 339 would be delivering another empty train to Ag Rock this evening, we knew it'd only be a matter of time before Mosaic sent out a shuttle job of that same empty consis to Four Corners, so we drive around the yard to the State Road 37 crossing again as Mosaic's 2 Jeep 38-2s approached in the dead of night, a very dark and quiet 10:21 p.m. here. I mentioned that Ag Rock is the furthest south that phosphate trains go, with only locals heading to Arcadia using the next 30 miles of this old main line to Fort Myers and Naples. Arcadia is still an important terminal for CSX though, as it is the end of the company's Brewster sub, but the beginning of the Seminole Gulf's DeSoto main line, from the interchange at Arcadia to downtown Fort Myers, a line I covered in great detail last summer. L851 is your train for that, originating out of Mulberry about twice a week and running down to Arcadia either very early in the morning or late evenings and into the night. On this day, we'd be waiting for a returning L851 just west of the South Mulberry Y, once again on the Valrico sub as he turns towards downtown in the yard.
L851, you ready for a light over? All right, I'll get you fixed up over. You're welcome. CSX KSL.
A51's route today would take him up the Brewster sub to Bradley, where he'd continue straight through onto the Aiken sub to Aiken and the Y at South Mulberry. I'd be with my friend and Seminole Gulf expert Cooper Tenorino on this day, and he said that from the looks of this long 851, this train is likely 2 Fort Myers trains and 1 consist, with 851 likely taking down the next 2 days' worth in just a day or two from now. There's a few more trains on the Tampa side of the Bone Valley that I've yet to document, not including the uncommon B301 though, a New Wales to Big Bend shuttle train that runs at most once a week at any time of the day or night. I'd be lucky enough to see it on the AZA line next to Port Sutton and Rockport, as he'd be bringing a loaded train of ready-to-ship phosphate to the port after making a run to New Wales in the pre-dawn. When I was learning about the Bone Valley in its entirety a few years ago, thanks to many helpful rail fans with a lot of patience, I found it easy to split the region into 2 parts. On the west side is the Tampa side, between Ag Rock and East Tampa, like the route of B339 or that B301. and to the east is the Bartow side, between Mulberry and Fort Meade. We've pretty much covered the Tampa side, save for a few nighttime locals and as-needed phosphate shuttles, so let's head east on the last few miles of the Valrico sub along a main line that's now the combination of both SAL and ACL routes to South Florida. Like Ag Rock, Fort Meade is another mine, served by trains heading to processing plants or to the port via B311. At Mulberry, a pair of engines sit on a cloudy afternoon in the engine track with the crew on board, preparing the 6-axle motors for a trip down to New Wales, running as a B371. B371 is another shuttle train between New Wales and Fort Meade, where empties are dropped and loads from the mine are brought back to New Wales for processing and transloading. The westernmost signal on the Valrico sub from Mulberry is North End IMC, and the end of the siding that the Mulberry Y and yard breaks out of and connects to. Lit up here with a medium clear signal from siding to the main would be that B371, light engines to New Wales, running this day about 3:30 in the afternoon.
Be clear, North End IMC, northbound.
Taking the turn at Edison south onto the Brewster sub, we'd catch 371 turning the corner back at Allen Street towards New Wales. Give it about an hour at the plant, and B371 has picked up his train and gotten his EC1 from New Wales to IMC, where signal territory starts all the way to Ridgewood. Now, from Ridgewood to Fort Meade is a secondary EC1 that's going to be needed, which 371's crew gets as they depart the plant and swing back onto the Valrico sub at Edison. We'd catch the train here at Edison's South County Line Road, where CSX maintains an AEI detector, which is a glorified inventory clerk for the railroad, scanning each car and locomotive's unique tag on the side to organize and take account for each movement by the detector. There's a few of these in the Bone Valley, including one of them at our next spot, just a stone throw away from Ridgewood. Looking east towards Bartow now, a high green would shine for 371 at North End Ridgewood from our stance at the area's AEI. A favorite spot for many rail fans around here, Royster Mine Road offers a good view of trains coming from Mulberry, slowly accelerating after passing the Diamond in downtown at 10 miles per hour. .371 would be huge today, with over 80 cars behind his two motors, with a couple to pick up in Bartow, where bad orders are set out and fixed and then grabbed by mainline trains, kind of like what we saw that B339 do back at Durant. As you wind your way into Bartow, you may find the city's golf course that's built around the Peace River on the east side of town. The railroad runs right next door, shaded by the branches of century-old oak trees, where I'd set up for 371 as he barrels south, with just minutes of daylight left in the day. South from town, US 98 follows the Valrico sub all the way to Fort Meade, switching to the west side of the highway around milepost SV 857, where it turns onto XACL trackage and starts the AX line of mileposts. Into Fort Meade we'd go, barely beating the train to town, as he can continue at his rate of 40 miles per hour, but drivers can't, slowing for the strict speed reductions seen on each side of town. At the entrance to Fort Meade, we'd end our day with the last little bit of twilight fading into darkness. Soon 371 will enter the yard and drop his train for Mosaic before grabbing a loaded train for New Wales and returning to Mulberry late tonight when all is complete. We wouldn't stick around for that, but I'd managed to find a northbound train on this line now coming out of Fort Meade in daylight with a loaded train, this time for Ridgewood. This is B361, another Mulberry-based train that runs between the mine at Fort Meade to the processing plant at Ridgewood, where I believe the phosphate is processed and loaded into GR1s for B311 to take to Rockport. Starting the chase at the AX877, we'd encounter another AEI detector, printed in its early 1990s Futura font for South Fort Meade. B361 would be coming out of the mine soon, and he'd be rolling, using every bit of track speed through here, passing the lazy cattle farms that butt right up to the main line. We knew that we'd never beat 361 into downtown, so we'd opt for a leapfrog on US 98 to Bartow, where the 2-mile-long Bartow siding is, passed over by the familiar State Road 60 and our photo spot for 361 in town.
CSX detector, milepost 850.4, no defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axles 296. Detector out.
Seen in some solid afternoon light now, 361 from above is a cool sight as you get to look right into those wet rock hoppers loaded with precious soil, mined likely within the last 48 hours. It's all destined for Ridgewood, as I mentioned, where we'd go next, to that same spot as we caught B311 coming in, now turning the cameras to the south leg of the Y here as 361 arrives from the east. He'd have to go through the same process of getting permission to enter, working with the B311 who was already in the plant, but once that wish was granted, he'd roll in just after 4 p.m. on this hot June afternoon.
CSX shuttle train to Ridgewood, over.
Y'all want to let that shuttle train in? Yeah, 10-4. We're clear over here on the Tri-Side. They can come in. We're clear.
Ridgewood to shuttle train?
Shuttle train.
Alright, that derailer's down, you can come on in.
Derailer's down, coming on in number. Here we go.
Our time in the Bone Valley would end here at Ridgewood with 361, and I also think it's a good time to end this video, considering its length up to this point and sheer amount of information. I really hope all of you enjoyed this one. It was a cool production to make, but one that I know I'll get some questions about, so feel free to ask away in the comments section. I'll be sure to respond and answer said questions to the best of my abilities. If you want to see a more detailed view of the Bone Valley, head over to my friend Dakota's channel, as he's making quite the full-length documentary on the region with great footage and his normal pristine production quality. I'll link that in the description along with a playlist of my previous trips of the area. But for now, and until we meet again somewhere out there trackside, this is Christian for Multicolor Films, end of transmission.